Chris, after the mini shutdown, the Republican-led Congress adds $300 billion in spending over 10 years. As Rand Paul points out, that doesn't sound particularly Republican.
No, it doesn't. And there are a lot, and there are not as many deficit hawks as there used to be in Washington. But the ones that are here, both in the House and in the Senate, are very unhappy with this bill. It's actually $400 billion in new spending that's not paid for, so that's all going to be more borrowing, adding to the deficit. Give you a sense of how this is turning things around. In 2015, the deficit, after those trillion-dollar deficits getting out of the recession under President Obama, had gone down to about $440 billion. Still a lot of money, but at $440 billion, the projection now is that the deficit in 2019 will be $1.1 trillion, and that when you take the tax cuts, which are not paid for, and the spending, which is not paid for, we're going to see trillion-dollar deficits again as far as the eye can see. The big difference in that, incidentally, is that in the past, when we've seen huge deficits and a huge percentage of GDP, it's been when we're out of trying to come out of a recession or a war. Those are emergency situations. We're going to have that kind of huge percentage of deficit during full employment. We already have concerns about the economy overheating and interest rates going up and inflation. Well, this is a recipe for only adding to that flame.
And you have to wonder whether all of what you just mentioned might have been part of why the Dow had its worst week since the financial crisis.
Well, there's no question that it all started a week ago when the jobs report came out, and it showed that for the last month, the payroll salaries were up 2.9%. That's a pretty big jump in 1 month. So you start seeing you've got almost full employment. You've got an economy that's not great, but it's just under 3%. And people, you start having to pay people more. That's good for those people, but it really does fuel inflationary fears, and that means the Fed is likely to try to pump the brakes by raising interest rates maybe a little faster. And now when you add $2 trillion in unpaid for spending, that only, as I say, it adds fuel to the flame.
All right. Now, the deal to reopen the government did not deal with immigration, but House Speaker Ryan did say on the House floor this morning that they would take care of the Dreamers. What's that going to look like, do you think?
I don't know. What's going to happen is if there is a deal to be made, it will be made in the Senate, and they are much further along. And Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, Senate Republican leader, has agreed to just put it out on the floor. This is very unusual, and say open amendment process. And basically, the first deal that can get 60 votes, a filibuster-proof majority, that'll be the one we pass. My guess is that they're probably going to be able to do that. But remember, in 2013, they were able to pass immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform, and it died in the House. So the fact that it passes in the Senate with a healthy majority doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to pass in the Senate. And then it has to be something that the president will approve. And he's demanding a lot. In return for giving a path to citizenship for the Dreamers, he wants to see a real crackdown on both legal and illegal immigration.
Well, Chris, President Trump commented today on the departure, the resignation or firing of his staffer, Rob Porter, saying he did a good job in the White House, wishing him well, with no mention of the two ex-wives who accused him of domestic abuse. What do you think?
That's only going to add, great concern to this issue. This has really been a debacle for the White House this week, how badly it's been handled. When the immediate reaction, when the story first came out of the two ex-wives alleging abuse, this is before the first picture of the first wife with the black eye, the immediate reaction from the White House chief of staff was to say that Rob Porter was a man of integrity and honor and that he stood by him. It was only when the picture came out that the decision was made they had to cut Rob Porter loose. Now for the president to again say, well, this is very sad and, we wish Rob Porter all the best without any reference at all to the allegations against him is only going to increase concerns that on this issue of domestic abuse that the White House is out of touch.
One last question, Chris. I'm interested in your thoughts on Kim Jong-un's sister sitting so close to Vice President Pence at the opening ceremonies in South Korea. And of course, she's one of the things she's in charge of in North Korea is propaganda. One wonders if looking at South Korea, she might be thinking, gosh, this looks pretty nice.
Well, yeah, I don't know that she thinks that. Remember, she's part of the ruling family, so her life is a lot better than a lot of North Koreans is. But that was a propaganda coup for them right there, for her to be in the box with the officials, with the president of South Korea, with the vice president of the United States. And that's one of the big concerns of the Trump administration, is they have been working so hard to isolate, both diplomatically and economically, to isolate the Hermit Kingdom, the regime of Kim Jong-un. And now it seems that with the Olympics and all of this goodwill and, you know, North Korean skaters and North Korean cheerleaders — I never heard of cheerleaders at a Winter Olympics before — but that is going to somehow bring North Korea back a little bit more into the community of nations, which makes it harder for us to try to persuade, convince, pressure the North Koreans to stop their nuclear program without ending up in a war.
Yeah. Who do you have on Fox News Sunday this weekend, Chris?
Well, it's going to be fascinating. We're going to have the budget chief from the White House, Mick Mulvaney, who used to be a congressman, used to be a budget hawk, and is going to be presenting a budget that is very tough and calls for all kinds of domestic spending cuts. But guess what? All of the domestic spending cuts, the Congress has already agreed they're going to increase spending on the domestic side by, as I said, $139 billion. So he's going to be presenting a budget which looks like it'll be dead on arrival, literally, before it even arrives on Capitol Hill. Right. We'll be talking to him. We'll also be talking to Jim Jordan, one of the heads of the House Freedom Caucus. And I wonder what he's going to have to say to Mick Mulvaney, his old friend, his own comrade in arms and fighting deficits. Now they seem to be on opposite sides.
Should be very interesting, as always. Chris, we'll be watching. Thanks.
Thank you, Russ.